Student Ambassador, as well as the President of the International Student Council. Like many students after graduation, Onalie went home to Sri Lanka to look for work and to begin to plan her future. With her desire to impact the lives of others, it's not surprising to learn that Onalie was recruited by the United Nations Population Fund to work as a social change entrepreneur. The social change entrepreneurs are responsible for developing initiatives that help fulfill the UNFPA's focus on health, sexual health, and reproductive rights of young people. With the goal of educating, empowering, and engaging young people throughout Sri Lanka, Onalie designed and implemented a program called 100 Voices for Leading for Change. This amazing young woman has accomplished much in the short year and a half since her graduation from ISU. And tonight we'll not only learn about the program she's designing and the lives she's changing, but hopefully you other students will learn from this example and begin to feel empowered to go out there and create change and improve the lives of others. So please join me in welcoming Onalie Ariyabandhu.
Good evening, our state. It's absolutely a brilliant experience to come back to where I call myself to be at home. This was my home for 3 years, and I enjoyed my Iowa State experience, and it's a real honor to be back, not as a student, but as a guest speaker. Now, before I go on to tell you what 100 Voices is, let me tell you how I got to the UNFPA and how and why I decided to design 100 Voices. Now, I mean, just like any student, I went back, any international student, I must say, I went back to my home country soon after graduation. I decided to go back to my home country because I knew I would be the most useful, and I would, follow my heart back home. And I really wanted to work for my home country. Now, having said that, of course, when you're a fresh graduate, you don't know where you would work. So, just like any one of you, I was also looking for work. I was job hunting, looking at newspaper advertisements, online job advertisements, and then came across this piece of newspaper saying, Social Change Entrepreneur, United Nations Population Fund. I had no clue. I just didn't know what that meant. And that was the very reason I thought, maybe I should apply and see what this is about. Maybe I should just try and see what the interview would be like. And that's how I got to the United Nations Population Fund that works for women's and youth health and their rights. Now, being recruited as a social change entrepreneur, I decided, I don't know anything about this organization. I don't know anything that I have to do. So let's keep an open mind and see what they would want from me. And the first thing my boss, Alan, the country representative for the United Nations Population Fund Sri Lanka, told us was that you're more than welcome to design whatever initiative that would address the mandate of UNFPA. Now, mandates and protocols and topics and subjects and initiatives, this was, although I was part of a lot of campus activities, I wasn't quite aware of what was going on. And then I came across this tagline. This is the tagline used by UNFPA Global to portray what they work on as a global platform. It says, delivering a world where every pregnancy is wanted, every childbirth is safe, and most importantly, every young person's potential is fulfilled. And that is what really caught my eyes. Because I'm an econ major with a heavy LAS background, and I just didn't know about childbirth or pregnancy or anything like that. But this last sentence, fulfilling every young person's potential, really caught my eyes. Why? Because I knew how much I gained from Iowa State. I was one of those privileged kids back home to get a university experience abroad. But what is it for youth in Sri Lanka? What would it be for them to be part of a bigger initiative, to be educated, to get into the world out there? How would they feel? I didn't know. I just could not relate to them. And moving on, I was swamped with these abbreviations. RH, SRH, GBV, SRHR, ASHR. I mean, I didn't know anything what this was about. These were all UN jargon. They love to throw it around. They love to throw around these words. And I didn't know anything. And I told myself, that's fine. I didn't know anything when I came to Iowa State. I didn't know where I was going to get myself into. I didn't know what the people would be like. I didn't know whether they would discriminate against me just because I'm brown. I didn't know. But I came to Iowa State, and I was among all of you. I have so many of my friends and colleagues in the audience as well, and I have my professors as well. And I embraced the experience. I did not want to judge my experience at Iowa State. And that made me realize I'm not going to judge my experience with the UNFPA as well. Because if I had judged when I came to Iowa State, being an international student, I would have failed miserably. Because if I had thought that this place would discriminate against me, I was wrong. I did not experience that. So just like that, I started to think about all these abbreviations. What are they? What do they mean? What is it about? And the only way I could get my head around all this was to read more about it. Now I'm telling you, our professors say this all the time in class, and we ignore. I used to ignore sometimes, and it's very convenient to ignore. It's very convenient to ignore and think, yeah, it's a research paper. You don't really want to read it. You just skim through. You'll probably read the intro, the abstract, and then the conclusions, and you're fine, right? Is that something familiar? No? Is that something familiar? Do you want to be honest? I see the nods. Right. And this, I was just like you until I realized it's not going to work in the real world. It's not. I had to read. And when I say read, not just a snapshot of a textbook, not just the intro, not just bits and pieces from here and there. I had to read cover to cover. I had to read papers to papers to papers and reports and reports and reports just to know what these are. Now, if I had to just tell you briefly what they mean so that you're not confused. GBV is gender-based violence. SRH is sexual reproductive health. ASRH is adolescent sexual and reproductive health. Then RH is reproductive health. It's all around reproductive health, sexual education, gender-based violence, and so on. But it's easy to tell what these words mean, but it's very difficult to understand what they actually mean. And this is when I started to think, okay, fine, I read a lot of literature, a lot of reports about sexual reproductive health, gender-based violence, youth and women in my country and also in the world. But what does my country need? What does Sri Lanka need? Before I go on to tell you what Sri Lanka needs, I'll tell you a little bit about Sri Lanka. I think there were a couple of students who were privileged to come to Sri Lanka on a study abroad program with Dr. Jain, I think in 2013, if I'm not mistaken. And they learned so much about the country with a first-hand experience. Now, if I had to tell you a little bit about the country, it's that tiny little dot you see right below India. So it's a tiny little island. I think if I'm not mistaken, it's less than half the size of Iowa. And it has 21 million people. 21 million people. And more interestingly, we have more women than men. This is something, something strange for a lot of, most of the countries. We have 650,000 more women than men. And mind you, Sri Lanka had the world's first female prime minister. And that female prime minister's daughter aspired to be a president of the country as well. So we have very dynamic women in my country. Going on from talking about women in the country, if I had to talk about youth, we currently experience a huge youth bulge. If I'm not mistaken, we have approximately 4.5 million young people between the ages of 15 to 29. So it's a huge youth population that we work with. Now, is that good? Well, it has its goods too. But is that bad? It has its problems too. And that is what made me think, are we actually making use of this youth bulge? Now, having a lot of young people in a country, one might say, it's really problematic. I mean, all the education that you have to give them, all the infrastructure, all the opportunities, it's a big challenge, especially for a middle-income country like Sri Lanka. But what I thought was, why do we want to consider youth as a problem? Can't they be the opportunity the country needs? And this is when I wanted to define what social change is. Now I'm going to go back and forth about my experience with Iowa State and how it led me to come up with my definition of social change. Iowa State, it was a very different experience for me because I had gone abroad on family vacations, but I never stayed away from my family for such a long time. And this made me look at things in a very different way. Meaning, I would take 18 credits, sometimes 20 credits a semester, like most of the international students quite often do. But what I thought was, in every class I sit, I wanted to learn something more than what the lecturer or the professor would teach. Something beyond the words they speak. Something beyond the textbooks say. This training made me define social change in a different way in Sri Lanka. Because a lot of people in Sri Lanka, or even in the development sector across the world, look at social change with a tunnel vision, where they look at social change either as community mobilization, where you work with communities, grassroots work, But sometimes they also define social change in terms of national policy or to work at a more higher level. But it's very rare that they look at social change as a cycle or as something that policy advocacy and community level advocacy comes together. Not many people often find the connections to draw the connections very easily, because it's quite confusing. It was very confusing for me because I had no clue when I walked into this job what I was getting myself into. But just like I trained myself at the classes I took at Iowa State, what I thought was, I'm going to see what I'm not supposed to see, or I'm going to see what I should be seeing, but not quite visible. So I started to see what social change really means. I mean, my title was Social Change Entrepreneur. It's a very fancy title, I must say. You won't find this kind of title in a regular job. And when I, used to go to my family or chat with my friends, strangely enough, there's no translation into the native language, Sinhala or Sinhalese. So I had to struggle to explain what social change entrepreneur would mean. Having said that, what is social change? What does that mean to me? So I wanted to define social change for myself. This is when I, spoke to people and read even more. Now I must say, I'm no nerd. I'm not a straight-A student who had a 4.0 GPA. That is not me. But every A or A plus I got, I had to work really hard. Really, really hard. And that made me look at social change in a very different way, because I wanted to see what is different about social change in my perspective. So I spoke to, what they call activists on gender. And I spoke to advocates on gender, and especially gender-based violence, and asked them what they thought social change means. Just like I thought, the activists would say it's about, mobilizing the community, working with the community, getting the community to do things. When I spoke to the advocates, they would say, well, it's about changing policy, implementing changes to national policies, legislature, and so on. I did not want to do any of them separately. I did not want to engage with the community only. I didn't want to engage with policy work only, because I knew if I had only chosen to talk about policy in terms of gender-based violence in my country, I would be missing out on something. I necessarily wouldn't know what the community would have to say about it. But if I had engaged myself only with the community, with women, men, and young people, and elderly, I would have been doing injustice to what I should be doing as a social change entrepreneur. And that's when I saw that social change really means a hybrid or an integration of policy advocacy as well as community level advocacy or community mobilization. Because it's like any union. There has to be coordination, collaboration, and there has to be synchronization of two parties. And that's what I saw with social change. Now, when I say social change, the name of the campaign is 100 Voices. But what does 100 Voices do? And what do I want to do about youth and youth potential in the country? Now, when I say youth, we have young people who, enter college, and we do have free education in the country. But although there's free education, I must say, it's a very, very, very competitive process to get into a national university in Sri Lanka. I was looking up on statistics to tell you about how difficult it is to be a young person in Sri Lanka. At the age of 16, you write what you call your ordinary level examinations. Out of the youth who write the ordinary level examinations, only about 50% would pass to do their final high school examination just before college. Only about 50%. So 50% would lose out on their academics just like that at the age of 16. And then, out of the 50% who sit for the advanced level examination, the final high school examination, only about 13 to 14% would get into a national university in Sri Lanka. This is a problem my country faces. This is a problem that not many people want to acknowledge it as a problem. Why? It's a free education system, but we lack resources. And that is why you see many Sri Lankan students taking different avenues to pursue their dreams. I know a couple of Sri Lankan students in the audience, and this is our story as well. So the ones who do have the finances, whose parents would support them, or who would get scholarships, would get into a foreign university. Some of them would, out of the ones who would not get into a national university, some of them might get into a private institute in the country. And this is the plight of youth in my country. So keep in mind, you are very, very, very privileged. And you have to know how privileged you are to be in a college as esteemed as this. Now, it's not always a sad story to be a Sri Lankan youth. I have enjoyed every bit of it. And that is why I went back to Sri Lanka to work for my country. And this brought me to think, what exactly do I want to do with young people in my country? Of course, out of those abbreviations that you saw before, the only thing that stood out to me, being me, was gender-based violence. Because that was something I did not experience in my lifetime, in my home front, and I didn't know what it would feel like to be a victim of violence. I didn't know. And that is why I wanted to know what it would feel like to be discriminated and to be a victim of violence. This brought me to think that it is about educating, empowering, and engaging young people to voice against gender-based violence is what I really want to do as a social change entrepreneur. Now, I must say, I was quite, although I wanted to do this, I didn't know how to do it. I just didn't know. So, one little lesson that I would tell you that I learned was that you don't need to know everything that you want to do. Sometimes it's fine to be a little clueless. But it's not fine to be clueless and give up. It's not fine to be clueless and be fine with it. That is when I thought, how am I going to educate them? How am I going to empower them? How am I going to engage them to voice against gender-based violence? This brought me to learn more about gender-based violence. What is gender-based violence? Now, the easiest or the most frequently used definition or the conception, the perception used on gender-based violence is that it's about violence against women. That women are the only victims of violence. Wrong. That's not true. At all the sessions, the trainings that I've been doing on gender-based violence and on 100 Voices, I always ask the young people I work with, what is gender? What does gender mean? Most of them say, well, it's another word for sex. Wrong. Sex is what you're biologically identified with. If you're a male or a female. But gender is what the society constructs. What your surrounding wants you to be, or what the surrounding tells you are. And that is what how you say whether you're a masculine or a feminine. And that is a social construct. And I started to tell all these young people, gender is not what you are biologically defined. They just didn't want to accept it. So then I started to read more about it and talk to people about it. What is gender? What makes people be so engulfed with the whole gender differences? And that's when I saw and started to read about stereotyping. Now there's a lot of racial stereotyping that you might be aware of. But gender stereotyping, I learned so much during the past 1.5 years. Now, Sri Lanka is a very beautiful country. Just like I said, there are many strong women, there are more women than men, but we were colonized by the British for the longest time, and the influence of these, of being a country under developed nations left us what I call, and we all call, patriarchy, where man would reside over the woman. And this is a very interesting concept or phenomena in the country, because you would appreciate, admire, and respect women, but there are certain unsaid, unspoken elements in the society, in the culture in Sri Lanka, where it's unsaid and unspoken, but it's very obvious that the man is over the woman. For example, I know, and this is not only in Sri Lanka, this is there in many, many parts of the world, where some believe, that the woman should be cooking and cleaning in the house, not pursuing education, not being employed, and that's all they should do. This is changing. This is changing rapidly in the country. But this happens. Some think that you have to get married as soon as possible and raise children and educate them while staying at home. There are some stereotypes that say men are better athletes than women, that men are stronger, better, and more driven than women. Wrong. These are all stereotypes. These are all easily constructed stereotypes by all of us. And we are all responsible. And even when I have very often found this, even in both cultures, that we want to shout at someone, we want to humiliate someone, we want to put someone down. What do we use? We use words that are inclined towards females or femininity. Wrong. These are all stereotypes. These are all wrongdoers that we consciously or unconsciously do. This is the problem. This is the problem with gender. And gender and the stereotyping behind it has given rise to what we call gender-based violence. Now, when I say gender-based violence, when I start to talk about gender-based violence, a lot of people, most of them, think that I'm talking about sexual abuse or rape. Of course, yes, I do talk about sexual abuse and rape. But is that the only thing that includes in gender-based violence? No. Gender-based violence is any form of violence that you project at someone just because of their gender, no matter them being female or male, masculine or feminine. And this gave rise for me to look at what are the other types of gender-based violences that we see around us, and we don't really necessarily know whether it is a form of violence. So the most common that you would know is sexual abuse and physical abuse. But there is what you call emotional abuse, verbal abuse, cyber harassment, street harassment, workplace harassment, and so on. And the list goes on. Now, out of these different forms of harassment, I think few that I would like to, reiterate is about cyber harassment and street harassment. Street harassment in Sri Lanka is, I wouldn't say it's increasing, but people are getting to know more about it, so they're being more vigilant about street harassment. So what is street harassment? Are you all familiar with catcalling? Yes? I see the nods. Catcalling is something disgustingly visible in the country. I have been catcalled many times. Now, a lot of people say that you get catcalled when you dress a short dress or a short skirt, pair of shorts, something without sleeves. If you walk on the road, that you would get catcalled. If you wear tight jeans, you would get catcalled. Wrong. I was one day wearing a very, what they would call modest outfit. Long jeans, something like sweatpants, a t-shirt, wearing, tennis shoes. I still got catcalled. And this is true in many parts of my country. And when I say catcall, it's not about a whistle or, a statement or two which, you might hear, you might not hear. No, you hear it. And these are not something that I would want to even translate for you. It's that bad. And the beauty of it now is that more women and men, especially young people, are aware of this. They're aware that there is a problem like this. And this has made them identify ways in which they can overcome them. What would you say if you're catcalled? What would you do if you're catcalled? And it's not only about catcalling. Sri Lanka has a very diverse and a very, comprehensive, I would say, public transportation. But, as you may know, it's a country with 21 million people. How many buses do you think we would need? I mean, I don't think we could accommodate any other vehicle if we wanted to have a, solid transport system for all the people in the country. So, for a bus which would probably accommodate, which is supposed to accommodate 40 people, you are likely to see about 100 people. So they pack you into a bus, which ideally should be carrying, say, 40 people. And, you have to just use the transport. You have no option. Some people don't have vehicles. So they have to use public transportation. Trains, same story. You might have to, If one a compartment ideally should carry 50 people, you might say 200 people in it during peak hours. Or if that's an exaggeration, there would be, say, 100 people in it. So imagine you're in public transportation, and imagine the amount of harassment a woman or a man or a child would go through. I have been in public transportation. I don't know to drive, so I have to either go with my parents or I have to use public transportation. Imagine I have been in public transportation where I don't get a seat to sit down in a bus, so I have to hold the upper railing and stand inside a bus, which has approximately, I would say, let's not exaggerate, so 60 people. It's not that bad. Say a bus, say it should accommodate 30, and there's 60. And it's not a pleasant experience. I have experienced myself where I hold this railing and stand, and the conductor, we call him the conductor, the guy who gives us a ticket and gets the money. So it's a very manual process. It's nothing automated. He would give me the ticket, get the money, but he would rub himself on me while he moves to the next passenger. Rub himself. And this is, you quite often see this happen, not only in Sri Lanka. I know this is very common in other South Asian countries. I have my friend Presha nodding, she's from India, and this happens. And it has become a norm. That's the problem. And this happens mainly to women. But it's not always true. There are enough and more boys I know who have been harassed in buses. Boys have been harassed by other men. So don't take me wrong when I say that gender-based violence is, that there's majority or a lot of cases that we hear on women. No, we do hear about men as well. I will read out some interesting global statistics that I've found from UN Women. It says that if you are in a room with 3 women, you're likely to find out that at least one would have experienced gender-based violence. 1 out of 3 women. How many women do we have in this room? Keep in mind, gender-based violence or any form of violence is not easily visible. And it might not be necessarily visible directly. There could be many individuals in this audience who have experienced different forms of gender-based violence. And this is the problem, because we don't know who the victims are. We don't know who the survivors are. And this is why we have to be educated about it and know how to empower and engage others to do something about it. If I had to read through a little bit more, it says, in 2012, 1 in 2 women killed worldwide were by their partners or family. These are global statistics. 1 in 2 women who were killed. Imagine, and these are done by their partners or family. Imagine the amount of domestic violence that they must be experiencing. Now, I personally have not experienced, but I know of so many individuals who do experience domestic violence at different degrees. Now, mind you, even though domestic violence is so prevalent in so many countries, only 2/3 of these countries have criminalized domestic violence. So sometimes you can abuse your husband, or you can abuse your wife all you want. You can abuse your children all you want. But you can get away with it. Why? Because they could interpret and say, oh, that's to discipline them. It's to get them straight. It's to get them right. That's how we raise them. That's how we express love. Wrong. And this is a problem in many countries. And they also, if I had to read through, and mind you, I'm reading it through this handbook, the 100 Voices handbook that some of you might have collected from the entrance. They say poor girls are 2.5 times, 2.5 times more likely to marry in their childhood as opposed to the wealthy ones. Now, this is a problem in many developing countries. 2.5 times more likely for girls to be married during their childhood. This is a problem. You know, when I do my trainings and programs in Sri Lanka, I always ask these young people, do you know the legal age of marriage in Sri Lanka? Not often do everyone know what the legal age of marriage is. Some say it's 16 for girls and 18 for boys. Some say it's 16. But the truth is that it is 18. You cannot legally marry if you are under the age of 18. And this is something not many people are aware of, which of course causes all these problems of underage marriage. And they also say 2.6 billion women and girls are vulnerable to marital rape. 2.6 billion women and girls are vulnerable to marital rape. Now, Sri Lanka has not criminalized marital rape. So we don't see that a husband can rape their wife even though they are married. And this is sad. It is a problem because there are so many women who go through this. I will tell you one small story, and you have to know this story. And this is not only a story of a Sri Lankan family. These stories happen, these problems happen everywhere in the world. I met a girl, she was aged 14, and she was in a shelter with 30 other sexually abused girls who were between the ages of 10 to 18. This girl, she was just 14. So I asked the counselor what was the story behind her. And they said that her father had been forcing her mother to have sex in front of the children. And this was a very poor family. So they don't live in a luxurious house or an apartment. It's a small little house, which they probably would have had one room or just maybe one or two rooms maximum. And he had been forcing the mother, beating her, forcing her to have sex. And what happened? She refused, and she fought back. She refused in a very aggressive way, which he did not like. And what did he do? He beat the mother, and he beat the elder son out of the house, chased them out of the house, and raped his daughter. Raped her while the mother and this girl's brother were yelling and trying to break into the house. She was raped by her own father. this is not only a story of my country. I can relate to you this story, I can tell you the story because I know of the girl and I have seen her and I know the story personally. But these stories happen all over the world. I know of students who were studying with me at Iowa State University who have experienced similar experiences or experienced abuse in different ways. So it is happening all over the place. But what are we doing about it? Are we doing enough? Have you done anything about it? I clearly haven't done anything about it until I started 100 Voices Leading for Change for the United Nations Population Fund Sri Lanka. This initiative became my brainchild to make sure that I do something about it and my country is able to do something about it with confidence and passion. Because gender-based violence is not something funny, it's not something light, it's not something mild, it's not something that we can compare from country to country. Of course, yes, you can compare statistics, but what is the point? If there is one single individual in this room who has been a victim of any form of gender-based violence, what does that put you into? What is the place that puts you into? Of course you can say, I don't care. It's not my thing. What can I do about it? It's not my problem. That's his or her life. Wrong. You can do something about it. And that is what made me design the 100 Voices Leading for Change campaign against gender-based violence to educate, engage, and empower young people in my country to stand up against it. Now, going back to these three words, educate. How do you educate them? Like I said, I had to educate myself before I talk to anyone about it. That's when this handbook came about. This handbook that you see is a product of the United Nations Population Fund, which I had the privilege and the passion to design and develop every word of it. This handbook has short stories, statistics, information about gender-based violence and sexual reproductive health for young people in my country to know more about it, to learn more about it. And of course, statistics are very boring, right? You don't want to hear numbers all the time. And that's why I realized that the youth mind, my mind, works in such a way that I would relate more to a story, that I would learn more from a story, and if the story was supported by statistics and figures and information. So this book, I'm sorry if I don't have enough copies for all of you, but if you do have time, take a look at it, because it talks about short stories about different types of violences. It gives you statistics about different types of violences, and it doesn't stop there. It's not about educating young people about the definitions of violence. It's not about telling them, oh yeah, it's prevalent. It's about telling them, how do you empower yourself and how do you empower your peers about it? Because that is